Muy buenas tardes. El Programa Universitario de Estudios sobre Asia y África de la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México les da la más cordial bienvenida a la Conferencia Magistral que se abordará las figuras de las mujeres en el Libro de los Reyes. Se encuentra organizada en el marco del Seminario Voces y Semblantes Libertarios, las mujeres y la literatura persa, que coordina la doctora Chekufe Mohammadi. Sin más preámbulo, le doy la palabra a la doctora. Adelante, doctora.
Muchas gracias. Buenas tardes a todas y todos los que nos están viendo. Muy bienvenidos a esta conferencia magistral. También tengo el gusto de dar la bienvenida hoy al profesor que nos va a dictar esta conferencia, el profesor Sahba Shayani de la Universidad de California. Bienvenido y muchísimas gracias por haber aceptado esta invitación. Thank you very much for accepting this invitation and thank you for being with us this afternoon. Bueno, pues para empezar un poquito, yo para no quitarles mucho del tiempo del profesor, nada más les voy a presentar muy brevemente a nuestro invitado de hoy y ya después les cedo la palabra. El doctor Sahba Shayani es profesor de lengua persa en la Universidad de California, Los Ángeles, y antes de venir a la Universidad de California, era profesor titular de lengua persa en la Universidad de Oxford desde 2015 a 2022. Él ha hecho su trabajo doctoral en el Departamento de Lenguas Orientales y Lenguas y Culturas Orientales, y su tesis se ha enfocado en el papel de las mujeres en los romances épicos persas del periodo clásico, especialmente en el Shanameh de Ferdowsi, en Visoramin de Gorgani y en Khosrow y Shirin de Nezami, que son obras todas de este periodo. Bueno, pues también les leo su currículum muy brevemente en inglés. Sahba Shayani is lecturer in Persian language at the University of California, Los Angeles. Prior to teaching at UCLA, he was senior lecturer in Persian language at the University of Oxford from 2015 to 2022, and has received his PhD from UCLA's Department of Near Eastern Languages and Cultures. His dissertation focused on the role of women in classical Persian epic romances, particularly in Ferdowsi's Shahnameh, Gorgani's Visoramin, and Nezami's Khosrow Shirin. Es un gusto y un honor. It's a great honor to count on your participation today, Dr. Shayani, and I will just stop here and give you the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Mohammadi. It is such an honor to be here with everyone. It's truly an honor. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And I hope that the presentation will be of interest and useful to all the friends here today. So I will share my screen with you all. Please let me know if it's working. Yes, you can see it. Okay, great. So my presentation today will be on women of the earlier Shahnameh and the concepts of liminality and agency in these texts, specifically focused on the characters of Rudabe, Tahmine, Sudabe, and Manije. So the Shahnameh was completed in 1010 by Abul Qasim Ferdowsi, and it is known in today's world as sort of the text that preserves the Persian language, modern Persian language as we know it today, and the history and culture of the Persianate people, of the Iranicate people prior to the arrival of Islam. The Shahnameh, Ferdowsi's Shahnameh was not the first Shahnameh. There were other Shahnamehs before his, but it is the only Shahnameh which we still have in complete form today. Shahnameh, as many of you will know, means the Book of Kings, Shah being king and Nameh being book in classical Persian. The Shahnameh is generally divided into two broader sections. The first is the mythological and legendary, spanning from creation to the conquest of Alexander the Great of the Persian Empire. And the second portion is a pseudo-historical portion, spanning from Alexander's invasion of the Persian Empire to the conquests of the Muslim armies in the 7th century CE. This map presents us with a good outline of the world of the Shahnameh. The Shahnameh begins, as I said, with creation and with the first primary kings, which in some ways are like the first human beings, each of them discovering different elements of nature, such as fire and the different works and métiers of humanity and so on and so forth. But by the time we get to one of the greatest kings known as Fereydun, Iran as an empire has been set, and it encompasses all of the, more or less all of these lands that you see on the map here. Upon the death of Fereydun, he divides the empire between his three sons. To his son Rum, he gives to his son Salm, he gives the land of Rum, which is Byzantine, to the west of modern Iran, so this area. And to his son Tur, he gives Turan, which is the northern region here. And to his youngest and favorite son, as it says in the Shahnameh, he gives his favorite piece of the empire, which is Iran, which he gives to his son Iraj. So Salm gets the western lands, Tur gets the northern lands that become known as Turan, and Iraj gets Iran. As it turns out, Tur and Salm become very jealous of Iraj's lot, and they plot and succeed in killing their younger brother and taking over Iran. And from here begins one of the greatest conflicts in the Shahnameh, which is actually primarily between Iran and its cousin empire, Turan. And this is a war that continues throughout most of the Shahnameh of the cousin empires fighting together. It's a love-hate relationship. They love each other on the one hand, and there's a lot of interactions between the two, and they're in a way very codependent on each other. But on another end, they hate each other, and they're constantly fighting against one another. Ultimately, one of the descendants of Iraj is able to avenge his ancestor's death, and he takes back Iran, and Iran becomes an independent empire that's constantly in conflict with both Rum to some extent, but primarily Turan. But this is to just give you a background of what the world, quote unquote, looks like generally in the text of the Shahnameh. Women in the Shahnameh play actually very curious and important roles. The different tales of the Shahnameh abound with a variety of female characters, and they act in different ways, such as mothers, wet nurses, sisters, daughters, wives, to lovers, concubines, to princesses, queen consorts, queens, warriors, generals, and so on and so forth. So as you can see, from the very sort of nuclear familial level up to the sort of reigning over an entire empire, these are the domains that women can have in the Shahnameh. What's interesting is that even though the women who tend to rule on a governmental level tend to exist in the later part of the Shahnameh, in the pseudo-historical, it's actually the women of the initial part, the beginning part of the Shahnameh, in the mythical portion, who tend to succeed in bending the wheel of fortune and the will of their male counterparts to their own desires and their own needs. So it's an interesting tension between the two in some ways, and that they're not ruling as rulers in the first half, but arguably they have more power than when they do reign as rulers in the second half. That's a more historical portion. And in the Shahnameh, there are a number of memorable women in the earlier mythical portion, and they play significant roles. These are women such as Gorda Farid, who's known as the greatest Iranian warrior, Katayun, who is the princess of Rum, of Byzantine, and one of the mothers of the mother of one of the greatest heroes of the Shahnameh, and Humayeh Chehrzad, who actually is an interim queen between her husband's death and her son's coming of age. But because of either the duration of their presence throughout the epic or the fact that they don't relate so fully to the key male heroes of the tale, many of these aforementioned women don't play as pivotal roles as the four women who I'm going to talk about today. And these women are Rudabe, Tahmine, Sudabe, and Manije. Each of these four women carries out their agency through different and sometimes shared qualities or characteristics. Qualities and characteristics that I will highlight. I've allotted basically 2 qualities or characteristics to each of these characters in my works, and you'll see how sometimes they're shared too, but in a way, each of these defines each of these characters. So we will begin with Rudabe. Rudabe is the princess of Kabulistan. Kabulistan is generally in a region near modern-day Kabul, so in modern-day Afghanistan, which is all part of Iran Zamin, Greater Iran in the Shahnameh. She is the daughter of a vassal king, Mehrab of Kabulistan, and his queen, Sindukht, who in her own right wields quite a bit of agency too, and is quite an important character to the text. Unfortunately, we won't get to her today, but you can see where Rudabe gets her strength and valor from. Rudabe is also the descendant of the evil magical snake king in the Shahnameh, whose name is Zahak. Zahak reigns for 1,000 years, and he has a reign of evil and terror. And Rudabe actually descends from him, and this becomes problematic in her story in a way, but also as a result gives her access to sort of a magical element too. Rudabe is most well known as being the beloved and later wife of the great hero Zal, and she is the mother of the epic's greatest hero, Rostam. And Rudabe's 2 qualities really in the text tend to be determination and boldness. Essentially, just to give you an overview of the story, Rudabe and Zal, who is the hero you can see in this miniature here, Zal is known for his very white features. He is born with white hair and white skin. They fall in love with one another and against their parents' will begin a relationship. And ultimately, through a variety of tactics and much determination really on Rudabe's behalf, Rudabe and her mother Sindukht, they are able to bring this union to fruition. And through this union, which is initially blocked off by the king and their families, ultimately comes into existence the greatest hero of the Shahnameh, which is Rostam. 2 portions that I want to look at from the text that sort of highlight Rudabe's determination and her boldness are as follows. So I have the translation here for you on the left in English and the Persian. For some of the text, I'll read the Persian just so you hear the melody of the Shahnameh itself too. But this is just an example of when Rudabe illustrates her determination. Ferdowsi writes, چو رودابه گفتار ایشان شنید چو از باد آتش دلش بردمید بر ایشان یکی بانگ برزد به خشم بتابید روی و بخوابید چشم وزان پس به خشم و به روی دژم به ابروز خشم اندر آورد خم چنین گفت کین خام گفتارتان شنیدن نه ارزد ز پیگارتان نه فغفور خواهم نه قیصر نه چین نه از تاجداران ایران زمین به بالای من پور سام است زال ابا بازوی شیر و با برز و یال گرش پیر خوانی همی یا جوان مرا او به جای تن است و روان. So this is the scene where Rudabe has asked her handmaidens to approach Zal and to ask him to join her in secret in her palace so that they can get to know each other well. And her handmaidens protest and they say, you know, Zal is born with white hair and he looks like an old man. Why would you want someone like that when you are such a stunning beauty yourself? You deserve the best of Iran's paladins and heroes. And this is when she turns to them and rebukes them in this passage and says, you know, such things that I desire neither the emperor of China nor the Caesar nor China itself, nor any of the sovereigns of Iran. Only Zal, the son of Sam, is worthy of my stature. And so, she stands exactly for what she wants and what she believes she knows from the very beginning, against the will of her handmaidens, her father, her mother, and even the king himself. So this, to me, in a way, illustrates the determination that women are allowed to have in wielding their agency and choosing their own future, especially in the romantic sense of who they want to be with. A good example of her boldness is shown in the scene when Rudabe's mother goes and tells her that your father has found out about your relationship with Zal, and I suggest that you go to him unadorned, taking off all of your jewels and makeup, and go to him crying and begging and pleading for his forgiveness. And this is the young Rudabe's response to her mother. She says, Bedu goft Rudabe piraye chist, be jay sar maye bimaye kist, ravan mara pur sam ast joft, chera ashkara bebayad nahoft, be pish pedar shod chu khorshid sharq, به یاقوت و زر اندرون گشته غرق بهشتی بود آراسته پرنگار چو خورشید تابان به خرم بهار. So instead of giving in to her mother's suggestion, she's in a position of weakness here. Both her parents and even the king are against her. Instead of saying, you're right, I'll go beg for his forgiveness, try to win him over, she says, what adornment? Who here is worthless instead of being worthwhile? She stands for her worthiness. So why should I go to my father in, sadness and, decrepitude and saying, I'm sorry? No, it is what it is. I love Zal, and he's the one who's befitting of my status, and I'm going to choose him. And so she goes to her father, as Ferdowsi explains, like the eastern sun, drowned in rubies and in gold, a heaven adorned in designs like the shining sun in verdant spring. And even her father Mehrab, when he sees her, is sort of stunned, surprised pleasantly by the beauty of his daughter. He still rebukes her, but nevertheless, I think she shows herself as, not being afraid of his reprimand, because she stands truly for what she wants and what she believes. So this is the character of Rudabe that I associate with boldness and determination. The next character is Tahmineh, and Tahmineh's story is quite an interesting one. Tahmineh is the princess of Samangan, which is a vassal kingdom in Turan, the northern enemy lands of Iran. And she is the lover of Rostam and the mother of the great warrior Sohrab, who is the son of Rostam. And Tahmineh is really known for two things: her wisdom and her sexuality. In her story goes as such that one day Rostam is traveling to the northern lands in Turan, and after hunting and feasting, he falls asleep. When he wakes up, his horse, that is the famous Rakhsh, is gone. And he follows the footsteps of this horse to the kingdom of Samangan and tells the king that if you don't return my horse to me at this moment, I will behead your entire city and set it, a siege. And the king says, no, please don't do such a thing, and join us for the evening, be our guest, and I'm sure we'll find your horse. So Rostam joins them as the guest for the evening and participates in the feasting, the drinking, and the merrymaking. And at night, he retires to his chamber, quite intoxicated and happy, and he falls asleep. And in the midnight, as this miniature here depicts, a servant walks in, and behind him, a beautiful maiden. And Rostam is stunned to see this beautiful maiden, and he says, who are you? And she proclaims, I am Tahmineh, the daughter of the king of Samangan. And for years, I have heard the stories and tales of your great victories and feats. And we'll see in the text I'm going to talk about in a second. But she says, I have bitten my lips in desire for you when I've heard of your great victories and of your arms and your strong neck and chest and so on and so forth. And she says, I have come here with just one desire, that I may spend the night with you, that perchance from you I will bear a son that will be similar to you. And she says that if you accept my offer, I will return your horse to you. I will find your horse and return him to you. So Rostam, of course, is elated and has nothing to lose, and he agrees. And they spend the night together, in lovemaking and happiness. And in the morning, when Rostam gets up to leave, they come and say, your horse has been found. Surprise, surprise. And before departing, he gives Tahmineh an armlet that he has and says, if you bear a son, give this to him as a memory of his father to wear on his arms. And if you bear a daughter, give it to her to wear in her hair as a memory of her father. This ends, and in 9 months' time, Tahmineh gives birth to Sohrab, who is one of the great heroes of Turan. So Tahmineh really becomes a symbol of both her wisdom and sexuality. Now you might ask, why wisdom? Ferdowsi repeatedly refers to this in the text. He says, Ravanash kherad bud o tan jan pak, to gofti ke bahre nadarad ze khak. This is one example of it, but on multiple occasions, he talks about how her soul was all wisdom and her body of pure breath, of pure soul, almost one could even say. And this is interesting because Tahmineh is using her sexuality, of course, to get what she wants. And in later readings, this is criticized at times, and even different elements or different lines are added into the text, that they get married in the middle of the night to make it sort of kosher and okay. But really, it's interesting because Ferdowsi in his own writing sort of rids her of any guilt or shame for what it is that she's doing. He's calling her purity, basically, and wisdom all in one. That what she does is out of wisdom in a way, and she becomes an emblem of that. Again, we see this here in the next passage. So this is Tahmineh speaking here to Rostam. She says, چون این داستان‌ها شنیدم ز تو بسی لب به دندان گزیدم ز تو بجستم همی کتف و یال و برت بدین شهر کرد ایزد آبش خرت تو رایم کنون گر بخواهی مرا نبیند جز این مرغ و ماهی مرا. And she goes on to list the things that clauses for what she will do if he agrees to spend the night with her. So this is a good example of how she's utilizing her sexuality as a way to enact her agency, really, to get what it is that she wants, which is a child from Rostam, but also the pleasure of spending a night with this man that she has heard so much about and been enamored by the stories of his victories and his strong arms and neck and so on and so forth. It's really a beautiful scene in which there's no shame in her for expressing her sexual desire, for wanting to be with this man, and also validating it in a way with wanting to have a child with him too. So before I move on to Sudabeh, so Tahmineh then becomes our emblem of wisdom and sexuality together, two very interesting concepts to have with one another. Next, we go on to Sudabeh, and Sudabeh is arguably the most evil female character of the Shahnameh, but also one who wields her agency as she pleases. She is the princess of Hamavaran, which is the Yemen, the name for the Yemen in Shahnameh. She is the wife of King Kayqavus, so she becomes the wife of an Iranian king and therefore the queen of Iran. And she is also the stepmother to one of the great heroes of the Shahnameh, whose name is Siyavush, which is Kayqavus's estranged son from another marriage or relationship. And Sudabeh appears in the Shahnameh in two different stories, actually, which scholars believe have two different sources, perhaps. But Ferdowsi, in a way, represents them in two different tales, but brings them together. In the first tale, she is the epitome of a good wife. She forgoes her own family for the sake of the king of Iran, her husband Kayqavus. And when her father tries to actually or imprisons her husband Kayqavus and tries to have him killed, she stands up for her husband and chooses to be imprisoned with her husband and takes care of him. So she comes out of this once the husband escapes through the feats and victories of Rostam. She comes back to Iran as the king's favorite wife. In the second story, her character becomes more complicated, arguably more interesting, but also more villainous. And in this story, she, for the first time, encounters her stepson Siyavush, who, after having been raised by Rostam outside of the court, returns to the court. And in seeing Siyavush, she falls desperately in love with him. And she decides that through whatever means she needs to get through, she will have Siavush. So she starts concocting a series of ruses, and one is to get him into the harem for the sake of introducing him to one of her daughters, for the sake of marriage. And Siavush senses something is off here, but he agrees and goes to the harem. And in the harem, Sudabe introduces him to his half-sisters, her daughters, for him to marry, as this was a tradition amongst the ancient Persians, like the ancient Egyptians. And Siavush doesn't fancy any of her daughters. And at this, when Sudabe sees this, she has this beautiful line where she says, but of course, it's no surprise that having seen the sun, referring to herself, you should not choose any one of these moons in my harem. Both the sun and the moon, particularly the moon, are tropes of beauty in classical Persian literature. And when she says this to Siavush, she takes him and kisses him on the lips, and Siavush freezes and is sort of filled with dread and fear. And here begins this sort of tension between the two. And she promises him greatness if she is to make her wish come true, which is to sleep with her. And he says no, and he denies her. And so she starts creating all this trouble. She begins screaming and pretending that she has been raped by Siavush. And her husband, Kekavus, Siavush's father, runs to the harem, and he's suspicious of the two of them, but he smells Siavush and smells no fragrance, no perfume of Sudabe's on him, so he believes him. And since her plot is foiled, she then plots another plan where she feigns a miscarriage and says that she was pregnant with the king's twins, but because of Siavush's attack, she's now had a miscarriage. Again, the king has to go through a series of tests and trials to try to figure out who's right and who's wrong. And ultimately, Siavush is actually put through a trial by fire, in which he has to ride through the fire on his horse to see if he's telling the truth or not. And he comes out victorious. And ultimately, the king believes him. But again, through time, Sudabe starts to sow this discord in his mind. And again, Siavush is seen as suspicious in the eyes of his father, and as a result, he leaves Iran. He flees from Iran to Turan, the enemy empire, where he takes refuge, but is ultimately deceived there too and killed in innocence, in complete innocence. And so Sudabe's ruses really end in Siavush's death, and this ultimately leads to Rostam coming to the palace, dragging Sudabe out of the harem by her hair, and chastising the king for having believed her and for having led to the death of Siavush, and of Rostam decapitating Sudabe at the throne of the king. Sudabe really becomes a symbol of two things in the Shahnameh, and that is magic and deception. Magic, how? In introducing Sudabe, Ferdowsi states, Zabanash cho khanjar, labanash cho qand. Her tongue was like a dagger, her lips like sugar. And interestingly, this is in the first part of the story where she's still seen as the good wife. But even here, we have sort of an inkling, a hint of what is to come. And it's interesting because in due course, we come to realize that Sudabe is accused of black magic on multiple occasions by Siavush. He calls her a demon, a monster, sort of an ahriman, a devil. But we come to eventually see that actually, rather than her having any access to real black magic herself, it's her power of speech that she uses to manipulate and control both those around her and the situations also that she's in. So it's as a result of this that Ferdowsi compares her tongue to a dagger. And it's interesting because ultimately it is this tongue, it is this magic that she has that kills her too, as she is decapitated with a dagger upon the throne herself. Her deception is very clear also. She's by far the most deceptive female character in the Shahnameh. On multiple occasions, as I mentioned, she's referred to as an ahriman, a devil, a div, a demon, and a wanton, a shukh chash by Siavush. She even admits herself to her maidservants that through ruses and a few lies, she hopes to get her own way with Siyavush. But perhaps what's most intriguing is the representation of her deceptive nature as Ferdowsi describes it in the Shahnameh in her harem. So I won't read this as we're running short on time and I don't want to keep reading in Persian. But this is a great example of when Siyavush reaches the harem and sees Sudabe, of how Ferdowsi describes her. And unlike Rudabe or Tahmine, whose youth and whose beauty are the cause, whose youth and whose natural beauty are the cause of their beauty, for Sudabe, it's really her adornment, her makeup, and what she uses to make herself beautiful that becomes a cause of her beauty. We see this in her harem too. He beholds a shining and golden throne decorated with turquoise and adorned in silk, and upon the throne sits moon-faced Sudabe, perfumed and painted. She's seated like the glowing star of Yemen, of Sohail, her curled hair all twists and turns, a great crown placed upon her head, and her muskin locks again flowing on her down to her feet, and maidservants before her. So it's this entire scene that's set up to help magnify the beauty of Sudabe. And as I said, in contrast to Rudabe and Tahmine, and even her own earlier manifestation, Sudabe's beauty in this portion comes from her use of external elements, decorations, perfume, makeup. And what Ferdowsi is trying to emphasize is that not so much it's that her natural beauty, that's that like her inner beauty that makes her beautiful, but what she uses to embellish. And this mirrors her inner beauty or the lack thereof with the lies that she weaves and so on and so forth too. It mimics her deceptive nature. So this is our character of Sudabe, with magic and deception being her two elements. Next, we have Manijeh, the last of the characters which I'll discuss today, and arguably perhaps the most famous of these characters. Manijeh is the princess of Turan, again, the enemy empire in the north. This is what I was telling you. There's this constant love-hate relationship between Iran and Turan. They fight, they hate each other, but they are constantly, the lovers are constantly between borders and so on too. So she is the princess of Turan. She is the daughter of King Afrasiab, who's the arch nemesis of Iran, also the cousin of the Iranian king. And she is the lover of Bijan, one of the greatest heroes of the Shahnameh. And Manijeh's story is such that she is one day out in the forest with her handmaidens, celebrating and enjoying life. And Bijan spots her from across the river, having gone to Turan Zamin to kill some wild boars that have been plaguing the people there. And he spots her and he falls desperately in love with her. And she spots him and falls desperately in love with him. And she has her handmaidens go to him and invite him into her tent. And this is another interesting element in all of these four women that I've discussed, is that they are the ones who approach their male counterparts. It's not the males who approach them. It's always the women who approach them. So she gets her handmaidens to approach him and bring him to her tent. And he comes to her tent and they spend 3 days in merrymaking and happiness and drinking together in her tent. And on the third day, Bijan has to return to Iran and Manijeh to Turan. And Manijeh is greatly saddened by this. She's greatly distressed by this separation. So she decides that she will poison Bijan with a soporific drug, a sleeping drug, and put him to sleep so that she is able to take him with her to Turan. She does this, Bijan falls asleep, and she sneaks him into her palace in Turan. And when Bijan wakes up, he panics that he's in Turan Zamin, in the enemy lands. And Manijeh says, don't worry, nothing has happened yet, just let's enjoy being here. So they enjoy their time together, but ultimately Bijan is found out. The king finds out that there's a stranger in the palace, and he has his guards raid Manijeh's palace and take Bijan captive. And Bijan is then thrown into a pit, as you see here in this picture on the right. He's thrown into a deep pit with a magical rock set on top of it so that he can't ever leave. And Bijan is thrown into the pit, and Manijeh is robbed of her crown and her throne and all her belongings and thrown into the wilderness to fend for herself. And so then Manijeh spends her days trying to forage food and digs a hole on the side of this magical pit to try to feed Bijan. And ultimately, through the help of Rostam and the Iranians, Bijan is set free with, of course, the help of Manijeh. And Bijan and Manijeh are able to escape Turan and return to Iran, where they live happily ever after. And the king of Iran tells Bijan to not only bestow upon Manijeh a crown and the jewels and everything that she has lost, but to then tend to her just as she has tended to him for the rest of their life. And they live happily ever after. As a result of this, I argue that Manijeh becomes a paragon of guile and sacrifice in the Shahnameh. Guile, of course, because she is able to use ruses and drugs to take Bijan into her abode in Turan and to keep him there. As you see, and this is the passage from the Shahnameh where Ferdowsi talks about the event and what happens. It's a beautiful scene too. When she is taking him, she puts him on camphor and oud in this camphor and sandalwood in the carriage next to her, and he's very well taken care of and tended to until he gets to Turan. So she becomes a figure of guile in this regard, and in a way I would argue that guile here is different than deception for Sudabeh too. Sudabeh's deception comes out of malice, whereas Manijeh's is coming out of love in a way, and in a way to try to be able to be with the one she loves and wielding her agency. And the other is sacrifice. I mean, the sacrifice element is quite clear, and it's really highlighted in Kaykhosro and the king's speech to, in Bijan's own speech to Manijeh. When he's imprisoned and they're speaking to each other from inside and above the well, Bijan says to her, you, O girl who has suffered for my sake, sacrificed soul, heart, belongings, and body. By this pain that you bore on my behalf, you turned my sorrows into joy. You gave to me treasures and a bejeweled crown, king, family, mother, and father. All of these you gave up for my sake. If from the clutches of this dragon, he means Afrasiyab and Turan, I obtain freedom in my days of youth, in the manner of the God-worshipping good people, I shall neither withdraw from this world nor long for anything. But like a servant before the king, I will gird up my loins in rewarding you. So he'll spend his life in tending to her. And this is really the reward that she gets for having sacrificed everything for love. But she uses both the sacrifice and her guile to wield her agency. So just to wrap things up, the concepts of agency and liminality. What's interesting is that all of the women that we have discussed have a lot of agency, and they exercise this agency through different means. Their agency, however, also stems from their liminality. It comes from their liminality. Although almost all of these women belong to the Iranicate world, they are from the periphery lands of the empire. So Rudabeh is from Kabulistan, Tahmineh is from Turan, Manijeh is from Turan, and Sudabeh is from Hamavaran. So they're either not Iranian at all, like the Turanians or the Hamavarian Sudabeh, or they're from the peripheries and they belong in they're linked to non-Iranian kings of magical descent like Zahak and Rudabeh. As Dick Davis, who is a scholar and translator of the Shahnameh, has written, it's almost as if these women from the borderlands, from the hinterlands, can and are almost encouraged to use their agency as long as it's to the benefit of the Iranian crown. As liminal figures, they're allotted this power until what they must achieve, until what they have to get for the crown is accomplished. Then they're expected to return to the shadows. And this is what happens in the case of Rudabe, in the case of Tahmine, and in the case of Manije. Once what is accomplished, once what they do for the benefit of the Iranian crown is completed, they sort of disappear into the sidelines. You don't really hear from them again much. And the juxtaposition, or the juxtaposed character, or the opposite of this, is the character of Sudabe, who, as one who doesn't return to the shadows after she has achieved what she's meant to do in the first part of the story for the crown, and who yearns for more and wants more for her own sake and not for the crown, she's ultimately crushed for it. As we heard, what happens to Sudabe is that she's dragged out of the harem by her hair, the very symbol of her womanhood, and decapitated upon the throne. So this is the interesting juxtaposition of the women in the earlier portion of the Shahnameh, in that they have a lot of this agency and they can wield it, but at the same time, it does seem to have to be in regards to the benefits of the Iranian crown and the patriarchy in many senses. And if it is not, then they're punished for it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Shayani, for this very interesting talk you have given us.
My pleasure.
And yeah, I think these women you chose really do connect to each other in some ways. And of course, they are quite representative of other women, maybe in the Shahnameh. I mean, leaving aside maybe the warrior ones or the diplomatic ones, which were not mentioned here. But I think it gives everybody a good idea of how women are described in the Shahnameh. And while we wait for questions to come, I would like to ask you something, if possible. You have talked about this liminality and about how if these women do work for the benefit of the crown, they are preserved, and if not, they are crushed. So I wanted to say, I want to ask you if you think this is like because of the Iranian version, because this book is made, I mean, the Shahnameh is written to preserve the Iranian version of the world, of the events, and so on. And that's why the ones who are liminal should serve to this central idea? Or do you think there is something more to it?
I think in some ways, and I mean, to be honest, I'd be curious to hear what you have to say, what you think yourself about this. But I think in some ways it's reflective of history, because we know historically that the ancient Iranian kings did do this. They took wives from other empires, as did many empires, really. It was a way of empire building, really, right? You marry into another family or into these the daughters of other lands. And in a way, as long as this is, again, because of the patriarchy and the sexism, but if you marry their daughter, then you sort of, they usurp to you, right? As the male, as the king, in a way. So I think part of it's historical, and it's not necessarily just Iranian, but it really does show, yes, a facet of the Iranian empires. And actually, in a way, it's even further proof of their empire building tactics, right? And how this was a thing. Yes, it was one of the greatest empires in the world. So of course they're going to use different elements. So I think, I don't know if it's just Iranian per se, but it's definitely, yes, it was Iranian also. They use it in that way. And when you do that, you bring in different elements into your empire, I think, and you grow your empire while at the same time maintaining the dominance and sovereignty of your own culture in some ways. And arguably also the entire beauty of the Persian Empire, at least in the Achaemenid period, was its ability to have a semi-form of unity in diversity, right? This ability to have lands running from Egypt to parts, to India, but still, and being able to control them and letting them all do their own thing to some extent, but having them all come back in some form to the King of Kings, the Shah and Shah. And in a way, this isn't that different from that concept, I think, too. on a more familial level.
I see. Yeah, thank you. And also, you know, because it has always been discussed that the Book of Kings is being an epic and all is like a very patriarchal vision of the world and everything. And that's why these women are like, yeah, they are important, okay, but at the end they are just like serving to. What do you think about this?
No, I don't agree with that at all. No, I think the Shahnameh without the women characters is the most boring piece of text I've ever read. I actually have zero interest in the rest of it, to be quite honest, because it's just battles between men that I don't find very interesting. It's the stories that have the women in them that brings life. It breathes life into the stories, and it makes it interesting, and it makes it vibrant. And in some ways, you know, I resent my own presentation in some ways, because, and in a way, because it's a part of my dissertation, and my dissertation continues to show that Iranian women do wield a lot of agency, but this presentation sort of stops here. But I resent my presentation for the fact that I don't actually think Iranian women are depicted as weak in the Shahnameh, and neither are they depicted as weak even in our modern culture. And I believe that really, even though there's thousands of years of separation between our modern culture and the Shahnameh it encapsulates the psyche of the Iranian people to a great extent. Or there's a connection there. You know, you can't rid the two of one another, as does all of our myths and everyone's myths and lores and legends. So I don't think Iranian women, whether in the past or in the present, have ever been weak. And I think the Iranian women of the Shahnameh are very strong. And that's actually what I'm trying to show, more so than the fact that if they're liminal and they move into the sidelines. In a way, all the characters move into sidelines to some extent, except for Rostam, and, you know, ultimately even he dies. But what's important is that they're able to get what they want. You know, that's the key for me. Even Sudabeh, who dies at the end, she still gets to, she tries at least, you know, she goes for what it is that she wants. You can argue if it's right or wrong, but she goes for it. And it's the same with all of the other women. And it's the four women I mentioned today, but as you mentioned, there's all these other women who do that too in their own ways, you know, even like Gorda Farid. I don't think Gorda Farid's character is particularly outstanding other than that one scene, but in that one scene she's able to show what Iranian women are made of.
Yeah,
you
sure.
know? So.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I'm really happy that you said it, because sometimes you have to, you know, fight for this.
Yeah, no, I don't agree. I mean, is the text patriarchal? Perhaps, but I don't think that's what the reader who can read between the lines takes away from it. You know, if you actually pay attention to the text, the female characters are fascinating, and without it, the text would be immensely dull and boring.
That's right. Thank you very much. We have a question for you, and somebody is asking if they would like to know if we could think of these literary characters as femme fatales.
I think for some, perhaps maybe for the character of Sudabeh, it's been said before that, yes, actually Dick Davis refers to her in quotations kind of as having the legacy of a femme fatale. In some cases, sure, Sudabeh could be, but not the rest of them, I think. No, you know, there's nothing. I think the character of a femme fatale, at least from my understanding, has to have sort of an edge, right? As doing something maybe to harm even if it means getting what they want. And that's Sudabeh. But Rudabeh doesn't do that. Manijeh doesn't do that really. So yes and no. There are those, but not all of them.
Thank you very much. Okay, we do not have any more questions for now. I don't know if you would like to add a final comment on what you have presented us today, or I don't know, maybe to give them some hints to people who are listening to us to read more, to where to find interesting stories.
Yeah, I really do hope that my presentation inspires people to learn more about Iranian myths and legends, and particularly the role of women, because I really believe that what we see happening in Iran today is not divorced from our stories and our myths and our history, you know, in some ways. The Iranian women that you see today fighting, you know, putting their lives on the line to fight for what they believe in, that's not a new concept at all. And quite frankly, that's why I decided to I chose this topic as my dissertation and wrote about it. I was raised by a single Iranian mother, you know, so I've always known that Iranian women don't need saving. Iranian women are very capable of women of that region. And I think also when I say Iranian, it refers to the large, greater Iran. This is true for Afghanistan too, you know, look at how much these women have been through throughout time, and still they're standing in different ways. And so I think that's two things I would take, like the audience to take away from this. One is that the strength and courage of Iranian women. And the second, to familiarize themselves even more with Iranian myth and legend and lore. I'm hoping to do, if I do a personal plug here, I'm hoping to do something sort of more on social media, maybe with telling these stories of female characters from the Shahnameh and so on. So if you're ever interested, have a look on Instagram. I might be doing something like that. But I think something like that might be helpful to sort of, because often people find it difficult to pick up a book maybe that's this thick and has all these stories, but just hearing them, they're willing to do. And that in a way opens our horizons and broadens our horizons. And that's all we can ask for.
Great, thank you. And maybe you could write us down afterwards. I mean, your I don't know how we can identify you on the social media.
Sure. Yes, once I set it up, I will definitely send it your way.
Great. So I will be sending them to anybody interested. So thank you very much again, Professor Shayani, for the interesting thoughts, also reflections you have shared with us. And I think we are going to just invite all other people to read more about this, to listen to more maybe social media stuff that he's going to prepare. So, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much to you, Professor Mohammadi, and to the university for having me. This was really a great honor. Actually, we will be having the Conference of Iranian Studies in Mexico City this coming summer. So I'm looking very forward to being there and hopefully maybe seeing some of you there as well. Definitely, Professor Mohammadi. Yes.
Sure, that would be great.
Definitely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Take care. Bye-bye.
Agradecemos toda su participación, asimismo a nuestro ponente y a la coordinadora del seminario por esta extraordinaria conferencia magistral. Les recordamos que comienza el 4 de octubre, arrancamos el Seminario de Literatura Persa. Tienen hasta el día 3 de octubre para inscribirse y nos manden sus fichas para poderles dar acceso a todo el material de las sesiones, y les recordamos que pueden pagar también a través de Plaza Prometeo o solicitar sus fichas de pago al correo de educom.puea.unam.mx. No se olviden seguir nuestras redes sociales y los invitamos a que revisen nuestra página puea.unam.mx con toda la oferta académica que está dentro del programa. Agradecemos a todos su participación y nos vemos la próxima semana al arranque de este extraordinario seminario que está organizando la doctora Checofe. Hasta luego y buenas tardes.